Welcome again for another set of instructions following the text by Dr. Vipaśyanā, the Moonbeams of Mahamudra. We will dedicate our time now to Vipaśyanā practice, insight, intuitive insight. And we will cover the pages 63 to 85 of the Moonbeams. And we are still in this section on what the Tibetans believe to be common to all Buddhist schools. So here this is the insight meditation practice that was at that time understood to be common at least to all Mahayana schools. And roughly this chapter falls in two parts. The general explanation with different types of insight meditation, and then the practical way to generate the view for Vipaśyanā to arise. Vipassana in Pali, means clear seeing. You could say it means seeing the truth that liberates. And when we talk about insight meditation, we should differentiate the mundane insight meditation, which is not truly liberating, from liberating types of insight meditation. You will also hear me and other teachers sometimes talking about the various insights arising in meditation. For example, someone meditating, like we saw in the last teachings, in shamatha practice, calm abiding, then will notice the arising of an emotional state. For example, a little irritation, or a big one, and not doing anything, one will observe that it passes away. So there is an insight coming from that emotional states pass by themselves if one does not engage in them. It's a very important insight, but this is not yet an insight that is liberating. It remains still on the intellectual level. And all these insights, which we can share with many people in the world, we call this worldly wisdom or worldly insight. And meditations cultivating these forms of conceptual insight with an observer, all of this we have to call mundane, worldly Vipassana. They develop a general understanding of the workings of mind. And then the tradition differentiates into a basic, non-worldly or supramundane Vipassana, which means actually liberating, which includes a true understanding of the Four Noble Truths and of the absence of an individual self. So, I repeat for those who are not familiar with that, to understand the omnipresence of suffering, the normal understanding is still worldly. But to be able to see the difference between grasping at the idea of self, the idea of a subject, and the state completely free of that grasping, this includes knowing the subtle suffering of clinging to something called self, some idea called self. And this understanding of the deeper nature of stress and suffering, this is only possible when one has the experience of complete openness, without any subject-object division in one's experience. And the same then continues for the other noble truths, the truth of the origin of suffering. First, one has developed a general understanding, and this understanding gets more and more subtle. But only when one sees just how unnecessary all of that stress is connected to identifying with the sensory processes, with the processes of understanding, and so on. All of this is actually operating very well without the sense of self. And then one sees, wow, when that comes in, when this form of clinging to an imagined center of the universe, when that comes in, then from there all stress, all suffering originates. And then also one has a direct experience of the absence of that by a deep letting go and opening without identification, then there are the open states of mind that are called awakening. One knows them. The old tradition also called them nirvana, peace, because struggle is over. No more struggle, no more stress. And if those insights are now coming from an existential level, from the guts level, you can say, then such a person also knows how to return into that openness. So that's the knowledge of the path of how to enter those awakened states of openness. This is what we call true Vipassana. True Vipassana needs to be an experience without the presence of a so-called self, without a separation from a so-called other. It's the immediacy of presence without any form of clinging, without any form of suffering or stress. Now, one can continue then these insights, these realizations, this understanding of the nature of mind. One can continue with that into the understanding of all phenomena. That means all the world, the whole universe of experience. And this is called then developing the understanding that even solid objects, as well as processes, as well as my own experiences, sensory processes, all of that, what we usually call the object of perception, that all of that does not have a self-entity, something lasting. And this is the extension of the insight into all areas of life, really including everything. For personal liberation, it is sufficient to understand the first aspect, that there is no self. Then there is personal freedom, and this is sufficient to be liberated, awakened oneself. But in order to engage in the world and to be helping others, one needs to also know that these situations in which one engages, like in the human world, for example, coming into the 21st century and helping beings in this world, then this in itself is not going to lead one into bondage again. But one needs to realize every situation, one needs to realize communication, interaction, life situations, everything as being without substance. This is the understanding of the so-called empty nature of all phenomena. Sometimes also called the illusory nature, seemingly real, seemingly existing, but actually only process. So this understanding needs to accompany the personal liberation to be completely free in helping others. Now you wonder maybe what I have experienced, what I have explained, and this was the first paragraph on page 63. And from now on, we will be only concerned with this endeavor to understand all phenomena, including the self of the person and the self of the phenomena. And this chapter here is written in a technical way, bringing in different ways of presenting Vipassana by different authors. And the idea of this first general presentation is to give us an overview of just how many approaches to insight exist. And so I ask you, when you study this chapter, although it's so difficult, but not to cling to the words. You should just read through and feel, especially in this chapter, what is behind the words. The words, they sound so technical. But actually, it simply talks about how one can enter deeper insight. So I've made you a list of all the different forms of Vipassana mentioned on the following pages. They cannot be put into a strict order. First there will be this insight, then that insight, and so on. This is not possible, but one can put them into an order of understandings which arise with the help of intellectual analysis and reasoning, and looking, investigating, examining, more and more finely, until there is no more effort and no more conceptual activity involved in the process of understanding. So we engage in understanding the meaning of the Dharma texts, the meaning of the teachings. Don't try to search in the book, you will get lost. You will need to just listen to the teaching, and then it gives you a guideline of how to study this difficult chapter. We also investigate into the process of how we give meaning to situations, of how we make sense of situations. How do we make sense, for example, of the different colors that are perceived by our retina and this information being transferred? We group colors with certain shades of colors into forms, into shapes, and give them by experience a distance. And we are learning to read color information, the light information which comes to our eyes, we are learning to read that as a three-dimensional world in which we can move so well that we can judge the distance. If I throw you my mala, I would know just how strong I would have to throw it so that you can catch it, right? I wouldn't do it. It's a holy object, right? So anyhow, the judgment of distances and how to move in a distance and how to move around objects without hurting yourself is a primary way of how we give meaning, distances and so on. And this we do with sounds. We can locate, we think we can locate the sounds from how far they come and what is the sound of that. We interpret, and this process of interpretation is going on in all senses and includes a comparison with our biographical information, the experiences we have already had. We learn by trying out. First we stumble, then we don't stumble anymore. We can go straight without hurting ourselves. First we don't know exactly which direction the sounds are coming from, then we learn to tell. We can differentiate and so on. And with all these processes, we structure our individual world. So inside meditation is actually looking at how meaning arises, up to the most abstract meanings of language. We can say into the space, we can say an abstract word like watch, watch. There we go. Does he mean to watch? Shall I watch? Or does he want his watch? Yes? We identify the sounds. We think we caught the right language. He's probably talking English. And then from this combination of sounds, we go into language, into words, and they carry meaning, and with that we can communicate. But it's all interpretation. It's all assuming that we mean with the same word the same thing. And this is where we go wrong. When you say Tillman, you mean each someone else. It's the Tillman you know. And when I say Tillman, I know I don't mean, like I can't grasp this Tillman. So it's like same word, different meaning. So now that I have taken you so long, you understand that Vipaśyanā is actually unveiling the way we structure reality, and that this reality is always subjective reality, always dependent on how we interpret reality. And this then we do, the list continues with entities, what we call an entity. So how can I, yes, I will use that. You see, this is because this can be seen through the camera. No, keine Schleichwerbung. Huh? So, entities are when our sensory perception singles out one part against the rest. So you have black parts here, singled out. This is the script, you will say, or this is a mark, and you single it out against the yellow background. So we are constantly singling out. For example, you look in the film and you single out this blue patch of colors against the background, and this blue patch is moving and it seems to have something brownish, whitish attached to it. Human being. Yeah, also has a head, and you single it out against the background that seems not to be connected, not moving the same way. So this is, we call this an entity. In German we would say a Gestalt, an object. And this is constantly happening, that we single out something from the rest. And this process of singling out depends actually on our priorities. What we feel is important. Some people look at a forest and they see faces in there. They see beings. Others just see trees. But it depends on how we group the patterns. You can see all kinds of things. Same with a word. We say, this is a word. But in the sentence, this is a word, everything is connected. I purposely don't make sound breaks. But still, we single out entities. This is a word. This is a word. Yeah, you understand? We are constantly singling out in order to give meaning. And this is called creating an entity, believing in the existence of that entity, different from the rest. So we single out a word, we single out a sentence, we single out an idea. For example, the idea of Vipaśyanā, insight. We give meaning to that idea, and then this idea begins to exist. But let's come to something more important, mind. We talk about mind. And because we talk about mind, and we give words around mind, then over the time we believe mind exists as such, but we have tried to single out something, and then we understand that mind only exists in difference to, in our Western world, matter, body, something like this, something which makes the difference, something which we call not mind. I, the so-called self, I, only makes sense if there is something which is not me, not I. So you see, the process of creating entities, working with entities, is actually how reality structures. How we structure reality, sorry. And we investigate in that in insight meditation. And we see that entities are being structured with characteristics. One entity, which is different from the rest and from other entities, has to have different characteristics. So here, my chimarrão from Brazil and the pen I have in the hand, they're differentiated now in the visual image by characteristics of shape, color, what they seem, how much space they seem to occupy. Then as you touch them, now my chimarrão is still warm, this one is cold, this up here feels more cold even, we call it metallic and so on. So these are the characteristics. If we can zoom in and identify characteristics, then these characteristics together, they make us believe that an object, an entity exists which has these characteristics. But how much, I hope I can do that, how much of the chimarrão exists if I take off this? Is this still an entity, a bomba all alone? Without its support, something is missing. So you see, it's a little bit artificial now to say it's the same as before, but it is still somehow the same and not the same. But I cannot put it down anymore. And it's the same that was explained in the reasoning of Nagarjuna when he explains, or the Buddha himself, what is a chariot? A wagon. Is the wagon still a wagon when the wheel is missing? And so on. The logic continues. Where does the wagon start? Where does the wagon stop? How many parts can you take off? Am I still Timon if I have one arm less? Am I still Timon if I have two arms less? If you cut off my head, where does it start? Where does it stop? So you understand the importance of characteristics, and that we try to find out if all characteristics are there. And if we believe the characteristics are there, then the object must be there. If an object is there, we believe that the characteristics must be there. So insight meditation investigates all of that, all these aspects of reality, and then we can see that something which was identified as a shoe, in the case of Gampopa, became a hat, which he was wearing on top of his head to cover his ears in the winter. So the different use of the same object made it into something perceived differently. And whether it's a shoe or a hat is not really sure at the end of the day. Right? So, like this, it depends on qualities. What qualities and functions do we identify? Actually, entities are called a shoe because, let's say for a human being, we wear them on our feet. But they could be called a house or perceived as a house for a small little living being wanting to make its nest in there, its house. So function and the way we perceive functions actually relate to which functions are important for us. Who cares about shoes if one lives in a country where no shoes are needed or where only sandals are useful? Yes, you understand. Functions and my priority of what I feel is a necessary or desirable function, then I will look in the world of phenomena for that which has that function. And I will try to define the time in which this object exists. So I have this idea, this has been here yesterday, but today it is still there. It has changed a little bit, but it's still perceived as the same. But it's not the same. Something has changed. And this is like sameness over time. And what is time? Past, present, future. And how do we structure time? In the world of appearances, nothing talks about time. Actually, time is change. Because it becomes light, we call it day. Because it becomes dark, we call it night. And then we make concepts about how long a day is, and we separate it into hours and minutes. But all of that is abstract. The hours and minutes cannot be found, nor the seconds and milliseconds and so on. Nothing can be found. These are artificial definitions. And yet everyone believes in time, and everyone is lacking time and searching for time and suddenly having time. I have time, can you come over for a tea? You understand how we structure our world and how all of that gives us a sense of security? I exist in time with these and these characteristics as an entity. And what defines me as an entity should not change too much, because that's me. And Vipaśyanā investigates just how this illusion of solidity is created, this illusion of a self in time with different functions, qualities, characteristics, different from the rest, having a certain sense or meaning, and it gives reasons for just how, that's why that should be like that. So also these reasons about how we explain reality to ourselves, also that is examined. Also that is seen as being very arbitrary, very subjective. So inside meditation or inquiry into the nature of reality, it includes all these aspects. And I think this list, which I just used, I don't know which one it came from. I think it came from Vasubandhu. But no, the Shravaka Bhumi. Vasubandhu. And is it? Asanga, his brother Asanga, yes. So this is showing us the topics, and we can in this way differentiate the different phenomena, like what all exists as phenomena and how that illusion of so many phenomena arises. Then how it is, we can differentiate phenomena as to the quality of the experience of experiencing a self and a non-self, for example, experiencing self and others. So we go into just how it is, and we see that all of that is dynamic process. We go from the cause level to the more and more subtle level. And we go from a level of reasoning and intellect to a level of direct perception. And in this way, we become aware by discerning, analyzing just how a certain view of of reality arises. And the Buddha Dharma, the teachings of the Buddhist masters, propose a sequence of views gradually leading us into the non-view, to be able to stay, to be in this world without maintaining the view of a separate self and distinct others. A view, for example, you can be introduced to the view of interdependence. And it will make a lot of sense to you that all phenomena are in immediate interdependence with everything around. The sitting person here is in direct dependence on the sofa he is sitting on, the cushion he's leaning on, the air he's breathing, and so on. So all this is the obvious interdependence, and we are dependent on the space to be, on temperatures, and then on interaction, and on what happens in the interaction. What was the contents of our interaction with our parents? What was the quality of that interaction? So this is the view of interdependence, which opens up to a way of seeing reality more close to just how it is when not using any view. And slowly we begin to see the way the Buddhas were seeing or are seeing, the view of the Dharma, the non-view of an enlightened person is actually the capacity to take all views. It would be, in the most developed form, the ability to engage in the view of anyone present in the situation, from the human beings down to the smallest insects, to the devas witnessing the scene, and to be able to take any view without believing in any of these views, to be the final objective way of seeing reality. So that it becomes completely clear that any view is an opinion, is my personal selection of which characteristics, which functions are my priorities, what I believe to be a shoe and what I believe to be a house, as my personal way of seeing things, and whether I believe in the solidity of walls or not. All of these personal, subjective priorities, preferences, they make the view. So the awakened person goes out of the view and abandons all views, and then abides and stays, meditates in this non-view. But to get there, we first need discernment and analysis. We have to look, we have to compare, until we finally enter the true experience of non-view, which is the first moment of non-dual presence. That means non-duality in Buddhism means no subject and no object. Okay? It does not mean the non-duality of Atman Brahman or something like this. It's not Advaita in that sense. It's the non-duality of self and other. No separation, no schism or schism in reality. And this non-dual, abiding, basic nature of mind, when that is experienced, then we have an experience of timelessness. The time frame is gone. The self frame, self and others, is gone. Belief in solidity is gone. Yeah, so there we have, for the first time, when the mind has opened to its own nature, we have an experience of being outside of views. The experience of reality does not depend on singling out characteristics anymore. There's no more clinging to characteristics. No more clinging to imagined reality. And when that continues, we call that realizing the view of definite meaning. The definite meaning, that what is ultimately true is, for example, that all words are lies. I mean, it's as true as it is not true. You cannot, if with a lie, to state a lie is also not true. Yes? So words are only as true as there is the common agreement to understand the same thing by those words. So when I say the nature of mind is a non-dual experience, I'm just using a lot of abstract concepts, and what I'm saying is not what I'm pointing to. So the truth is what needs to be experienced, and words, concepts, ideas are only pointers. So when we know about definite meaning, then we know that the word I, or self, me, ego, is just as much a concept as the words nirvana, enlightenment, awakening, liberation. None of this exists as something graspable, as something that you can pin down. They are all ways to communicate experiences which themselves defy definition. All experiences are changing, are in constant movement, and nothing can define them, pin them down, make them into something always like that. There's always change, there's always movement, there's always progress. So that's the view of definite meaning, to completely enter the process nature of reality, not trying to be different, not like someone swimming in the river and looking around, me in the process. The process is me. I'm completely part, because of the interdependence, the so-called self, which no one really knows how far it goes. Because the impact that, for example, my words are having, if the self is identified to be the sphere of action of this stream of being, then at this time there are so many effects in the minds of those who listen. This is where does it stop? Does it stop here when it comes out of the mouth? Or does speaking only exist when it is being heard by someone and has an effect and is being understood? You see, if you go with process, action, interaction, result, coming back, and so on, we cannot make definite limits. We cannot even see or hear anything, because if we establish a boundary, here stops the eye which is seeing, and over here is the object which is seen, what traverses the distance? And how does the object come to the eye? You see, we have lots of logical problems when we separate reality into perceiver and perceived. And seeing happens without problem. Hearing happens without problem, just without separation. And the intellect has difficulties to follow because the intellect wants concepts in order to understand, while the experience shows it already works before the concept is there. So all of that is understanding the definite meaning in relation to mind and phenomena. And when we begin to understand that, just how everything takes form, becomes concept, becomes an understanding, and so on, and then is expressed, then actually on the basis of that connection to the abiding natural state of mind, then we can understand all dharmas, all teachings of the tradition. On the basis of that, not only mind and phenomena is understood, but cause and effect, what we call karma. We understand that karma is not talking about one thing happening here, one entity having an impact, creating an effect in a future life of something here on a certain entity. We understand karma as being just another way of describing interdependence. Just how is it that a certain way of interacting with the world has certain consequences if the normal other causes and conditions interact in the usual way. But there can be other interactions that completely change the effect of the original action. And so karma and all other teachings that were explained by the Buddha and other Buddhist masters can only truly be understood when one knows the dimension from which they were talking. The words that awakened masters are using are simply trying to point in the most skillful way to an experience of openness that cannot really be grasped, that cannot be defined. Trying to say, look, like the famous looking to the moon, you know, when we say, look, do you see the moon? Then even my finger does not have to point directly to the moon, because I cannot reach the moon. Even it does not have to be straight. We talk about the old lady pointing to the moon, and the old lady has this crooked finger, so you see the moon, and actually her finger, if you follow it, is pointing to the earth. But everyone knows where to look, and yes, and everyone sees the moon out there. But actually, we only see white light in contrast to dark light, and we call it a moon. So this is the general explanation of what we do in insight practice. We investigate the nature of reality to become free of all the illusions. We make a short break here and continue in another teaching.